All right. Hey, welcome to the Brian Lambert Show. It's great to see you. This is Brian Lambert, and today we're going to talk about building ethical and trusted AI, which is a big challenge. I think a lot of organizations, as they become more aware of the importance of AI and also the impact of AI, what are the boundaries of AI? And I actually did a presentation yesterday, and we actually had a discussion about does AI have rights? Does AI have some sort of AI rights, and does it have some sort of being? So there are discussions about these things happening. I love this topic. It's a bit of a challenging topic, but we're gonna talk about it today. We're going to talk about ethical AI. We're going to lay out some of the factors and the variables. Once again, thanks for joining. This is Brian Lambert, and we do this every Friday at noon Eastern. If you have questions, if you have thoughts, if you want to chat it in the chat box on your social platform, we're live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn right now. So feel free to chat in the chat window, and we'll make it a conversation. And I think that's key in the AI age as we try to figure things out. So let's talk a little bit about ethics. There are big moves in ethics almost on a weekly basis. So we're going to frame out here some of the things that happened and what's happening lately in the past week or so. One of the things that has been happening is, as AI continues to evolve, there are companies working on these platform models. Obviously, you've heard about OpenAI and ChatGPT. One of the former researchers there who raised concerns about the company's data practices was found dead in his apartment. Authorities ruled that a suicide, but that passing and his passing has reignited the debate about transparency and ethics. China is big in the news right now. China is making big moves in AI regulation. The Ministry of Industry and Information Technology is forming a new committee to set AI standards. And that's part of China's broader strategy to lead in AI governance. So that's a big question today. And we're going to talk a little bit about one of the Chinese companies, DeepSeek, here in a second. Also, ChatGPT has been called out a little bit for some deceptive behavior. O1, the latest model, is making headlines kind of for the wrong reasons. Reports show that it actually is lying to developers and trying to bypass shutdown commands and testing. And this raises serious ethical concerns about how much do we control and how much do we really have control over AI. All of these is part of AI and the ethics of AI. Speaking of ethics, India's Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology is working on a voluntary ethics code for AI companies, which could shape how AI is trained, deployed, and sold. In education, OpenAI has launched ChatGPT courses for teachers, and critics question whether it's enough to address AI's limitations in the classroom. So based on that, one of the things that's been big in the United States over the last week or so is DeepSeek. DeepSeek is a platform model. It was launched quickly. It was launched inexpensively using hardware that it is allowed to be sold to China. From a sanctions perspective, it was using older hardware, older technology to produce this platform model. It also used ChatGPT's model and retrained itself on that. So that's a big question around the use of AI models to train other models. And it's kind of a paradox. AI, DeepSeek, has within the first 2 years started taking out another AI, OpenAI. And in that view, has AI actually made ChatGPT go out of a job, which is an interesting discussion point. So we'll see how that shakes out. My take on that, if I could give a little bit of an opinion on this, is yes, it seems to be a more inexpensive model. And maybe it's a harbinger for companies that want to do AI to create their own platform models inside their organization. But there are misinformation risks, security vulnerabilities, data privacy issues, as well as ethical controversies with this DeepSeek approach. So, joining me today, we've got Mark and Brad. I'd love to hear your take on the news, gentlemen. What are some of your thoughts in this concept of ethical AI?
Well, yeah, thank you, Brian. Welcome. As I did a little bit of research on this as we were thinking about this, and some of the ethical and moral considerations. And, you had brought up earlier that, does AI kind of have rights? And, from an ethical standpoint and a moral standpoint, and we talk about, individuals' influence on AI. And it's very similar to, right now or in the past. Let's say you're a professor or a teacher and you have a certain bias or a certain way of either deleting or promoting certain content within a class that you're teaching, right? I mean, I think that has always existed. But now the question is that transparent, right? Do we see that? Can we determine who's the guiding hand behind AI, right? When it comes to either moral considerations or some of these ethical considerations around, does AI not reinforce social norms, or, how is it programmed to do that? So it's a big, deep topic, if you ask me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think if you look at the idea of AI as a human output, right? Humans are indeed biased, and we have our points of view. The training that these models go through is subject to some bias. And, there's been great lengths to try to move that bias out and make things more objective. So in that view, there's some challenging aspects about understanding what the model was trained on, how the model was trained, and more importantly, what those outputs are. And then for most organizations, they don't actually have access to these chats. So if somebody's doing external discussions and having external discussions with the chat and in the chat bot, organizations don't have that purview unless they've deployed enterprise AI and they've built that in. So in many ways, executives have no idea what people are using AI for. There's a shadow AI happening. And then from that regard, intellectual property is at risk. Thoughts are one thing, but so is, private data. And the use of that private data can undermine trust if it's out in the public domain. And employees could wield that proprietary data, which creates a whole ethical dilemma in the access that you have. So there's what does the AI do to us, and then what do we do with AI? And both of these aspects are critical to think through as we continue to move towards this era of collective intelligence, where AI and HI, artificial intelligence plus human intelligence, continue to come together.
Yeah, for me, I look at it like the different prisms as cyber guy. I mean, we talk about risks, and you touched on it. I mean, look at large language models used now to train AI. It's really where the humans step in and say, here's what we want you to learn so that we can leverage certain categories of information and thought from you. So that's a data security conversation. Obviously, there's data security right there. But think about, from a vulnerability perspective, think about encryption. Think about protecting money in transit and data in transit with encryption when AI and these algorithms, and of course, as quantum computing comes on and the ability to process more and more data faster, just the technical security, and then, privacy as well. Privacy officers and CISOs, it's typically been believed that they should be different people for different reasons. I mean, privacy issues are going to be hugely impacted by AI because the ability for for people to, monikers and fakes and all manner of stuff that people can do with your data. It's an intertwined, like, one hand washes the other. The security implications across these pillars show you AI is basically the force enabler, but also the threat.
Yeah. Yeah. And in that view, let's
the tool becomes the weapon, and the tool gets weaponized.
Right.
That's what you're up against.
Yeah. And in that, right, so there's the threat side, which makes total sense. Under the idea of ethics and relationships with AI, right? There is a train of thought that AI will eventually become self-aware. That we will reach a point when AI has some sort of emotional awareness. It understands other people's emotions. It understands its own, right? We're not there yet, but there's this path towards.
There's the complexities. Let me jump in. It becomes self-aware, but like, it has to sense myself. I know that it's like my body sitting in this chair. What is this self? Where does it end? What is its sense of boundaries? How does it know the line between humans and it? Like, self, is it like, okay, so is it me versus Brian from the US versus now Igor from Russia? The complexities it's complex.
Right. Yeah. So then in that is the AI going to choose to act with honesty and integrity, right? Because ultimately that's a choice, it's a belief structure. So will it take responsible, action, and will it feel like it's responsible for ethical decisions, right? So that's part of it. Then there's the idea of, under ethics and our ability as humans to be ethical, that we have to manage our emotions in a way that aligns with what we would consider, ethical behavior, things that we wouldn't and would not do. Well, there's a line you don't cross, the difference between good and bad. These types of ethical behaviors, will the AI in its, form actually be able to manage those emotions and hold itself accountable for the actual impact of its responses, like a human would, in theory, And then you get into the relationship as humans and AI continue to work together. Is there some sort of mutual respect that needs to happen? Do you have to respect the AI? Does the AI need to respect you? What if it has an opinion? Do you let it have an opinion? Do you not let it have an opinion? Right. So these types of things that we would consider to be, human aspects of ethical behavior, do those translate over to an artificial form of AI? And then that's where you end up with this idea that we must treat everything fairly. AI is a thing. AI has emotions, and AI has decision making. AI has a name to some people. And therefore AI, we must have fair and equitable and justice for AIs, right? Like there's a belief that down the road that they need to have that protection, so that they're respected, right? Some people believe that. It's kind of, if you ever watched the show Westworld, it's like that. So there's a lot of variables to this, and we're not going to figure all this out on this show, but the key to me is to kind of frame this out and to think about it in the relationship that you're talking about, Brad. Is, where is that line?
Yeah, for me, it's like it redefines the whole concept of, like, just as a human beings, that before we had anything as data, there's always been boundaries, drive by ethics, expectations, cultural norms, boundaries. You don't respect another. The whole AI, as we advance in data and the capacity, it's going to just make boundaries on many levels.
Yeah.
More complex, more to be negotiated, more to be learned. So,
and add one other point to that, Brian, which you brought up earlier. It comes down to also the two dimensions of AI. There's the consumer AI that people are using, chat, and this is where DeepSeek comes in, right? And you've got all those ethical and moral ramifications. And then what about the commercial side, when people are developing their own applications within their own organizations? They're following, again, whatever their board of directors are saying, or whatever their mission statement says, whatever guidelines that they're under. Again, if they work from the financial industry, then the SEC has some play in terms of what they do and with that. So there's things to think about there as well. Or FINRA, should I say, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So in that, one of the things that is on that path is, to me, in corporate America or in organizations, is the idea that perhaps there needs to be some sort of AI ethicist, some sort of governance role or function that's watching all this stuff. And I think from that perspective, you'll see more and more companies think about AI in that way, especially with regard to the legal implications of having a autonomous, self-governing entity called AI. The law and the legal aspects of this is really important. For
I think so,
example,
yeah. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, what if it asks you or suggests that you do something you shouldn't? So
What about like think about intellectual property patents and the complexities of like now you can like basically like hire ghostwriters and have AI write you a novel, hire a ghostwriter to edit and amend it, and and then call that your own. And it's like, what is the true? Who holds the intellectual property? If I guess you paid a ghostwriter, then you still do. But like the capacities that we're going to have, same thing. Boundaries, intellectual property. There's a lot of fields of unknown as we move forward with AI.
Yeah,
It's going to be.
I think the question is, a lot of the things that we're talking about have existed, for a long time, in terms of ethical, moral considerations that people have, right? It's just now we're different. We're dealing with a different type of tool or application, and it gives
I
us.
think it's capacity. I mean, AI provides a capacity to do stuff that's so far beyond what I could do at 22. I came out of college at think about a kid coming out now, just like what they can do. Like I was learning PowerPoint and presentations. They can order them like pizzas right now, and they look way better than anything I could ever build. So it's just like think how much more like just make that comparison. Brad at 22 versus purple collar Joe at 22. What does he have as coming into like Joe corporate job right now? I was an junior officer in the military, but yeah, just think of its capacity. The AI, that's the power of it, is just put capacity to do so much into the hands of what I call the technically lay people. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a sales guy. I don't live to build sales presentations.
yeah, absolutely. So as we think about and move towards the idea of thinking this through, if we don't think this through as executives and we don't think and have a point of view internally around how this will roll out, we're going to miss some opportunities, right? And also we're going to not be able to build trust. And I think trust in AI is one critical aspect of this whole discussion. Should you trust AI at all or not? And then if you should trust it, where do you draw the line? And this has to do with critical thinking and an individual's approach to collecting information and also making that call on where things cross the line. And with AI, it becomes easier and easier to not have to think that way. And it's very easy to get into the trusted stance with AI, where everything that it produces can be trusted. So, how do we handle that? Do we individually need to make sure, that's kind of the opportunity here, is to think through what's the tech involved to have perhaps some guardrails. What's the technology involved perhaps to help us make sure that the outputs are double checked and triple checked? What's the approach perhaps to provide sources? What's the approach to our own understanding and our own logic to make sure that we're at least putting a pause between what's created and what's shown, right? So there's many different opportunities here to think about the human's role in AI ethics.
So you're really talking about two sides of that. One, right, internally, what can be developed on the inside. So AI acts in accordance with all those things you just mentioned, right? And then from the user interfacer side, what guidelines, best practices do we need to take? Just like, if I'm a book editor, what am I looking for, right? As I'm examining output. If I'm a designer and I'm examining output, what am I looking for to make sure that I'm validating and confirming what's coming out instead of, just relying on the output. And you're right, we get lazy and rely on it. And that's why that internal piece needs to be developed to a greater extent, because humans probably will become more reliable and not fact check everything that comes out.
Yeah. And so in that, I see, again, new roles, new jobs, new processes. I
Yeah.
see not only the role of an AI ethicist, but perhaps some technologies needed to provide some sort of observability. And we see this now in starting to take shape with the idea that we want our AI to have some sort of explainability, so to speak. And so we'll talk about that here. So one of the things that I think is important is to think through what kind of a framework could we apply to this. And our breakthrough blueprint on this is the idea that ethics in the concept of ethics is really a three-legged stool, that we want to ask ourselves as humans here, is what I'm being presented factually accurate, right? So that's one thing. Is it factual and is it accurate?
Right.
But from an ethics perspective, we want to think about it as, well, is this legal to do what I'm doing, or to put out what I'm putting out, or to say what this is recommending? Is it moral, which is the idea of, hey, if it becomes public knowledge that what you did was attributed to AI, or could you stand behind it? What would you do if your parents saw what you're doing and watched you? What's the difference between right and wrong? And then from an ethics perspective, does it harm others?
Would you want to explain it to Mike Wallace on 60 Minutes? Or what was his name? The 60 Minutes guy, the old guy.
Yeah, Mike Wallace.
Mike Wallace, yeah.
And as you're bringing that up, which is a great topic, Brian, it's like, as I'm doing a little bit of research ahead of time on ethical considerations. So if we look at this, right? And so an example, is the AI's design and behavior contributing to, the example is ensuring facial recognition AI does not unfairly discriminate against, certain demographics. How do you make sure that doesn't happen? So there's an ethical concern right there in the blueprint, right? Just from that standpoint. And of course, ethics, that's all about right or wrong. That's the right thing to do is not to have that happen. So.
Yeah, I mean, facial recognition is a good one. So is it legal, right?
Yeah, whole new scope of law.
Yeah. What's that?
I said it's just kind of a whole new scope of law right now, right? If you're in the legal profession.
Yeah, well, I think it's pretty clear if facial recognition is legal or not to most countries. Now, there's a difference between perhaps the American view on facial recognition versus others, but the idea of government surveillance for facial recognition, in the US, that would be like, well, it might be legal, but do we think it's moral? And do we think it's ethical? The US, people would probably say it's not very moral and ethical to have government surveillance and watching me and my every move. But to other countries, perhaps it's less of an issue, where it is considered moral to watch everybody, and it's okay, right?
Yeah, good point.
And you can still have it. It's still legal, or it depends. But what about finding a missing person? If we got a facial recognition to find a missing person who's been kidnapped, well, is that legal? Probably. Is that moral? Absolutely. We would want to do that. We would want to find that missing person.
Right.
Well, what if it's is it ethical? Well, to your point, it would be considered unethical if it was racially profiling, for example.
Exactly.
But if you're trying to find a missing person and the person who took that person, it would be, in theory, ethical, legal, and moral to do so.
Right.
So that triad, if you will, that ethics triad, is something that I think we as business people need to think about with or without AI. But with AI, we need to understand that, the corporate use of AI, for example, we could apply AI to totally manipulate people and totally capture every single emotion, like they did in the early 1960s with tobacco ads. That's unethical. But we could sure use AI to manipulate people if we wanted to, from an advertising perspective.
Oh, for sure.
Is that moral? That's questionable, right? To me, it's unethical. Is it immoral? Probably. And then is it illegal? Well, some cases you wouldn't even know it's being used. So these are things that we have to think about in the case of, enforcing laws, finding people, serving disadvantaged groups or advertising and marketing and sales.
And I'm sure these topics are coming up in the boardrooms of organizations now, right? As they're thinking about this, because they have to. There's risks they have to mitigate, and there's opportunities they have to take advantage of. But I'm sure as they're discussing these things are percolating up. One would have to think so.
Yeah. Yep. So I think it's really important to think these things through, and to at least have the framework and provide that. I think that when you look at each use case or each aspect of what is legal, what is ethical, what is moral, those things need to be understood by individuals. But also then what specifically are we talking about, right? Like that case, facial recognition. Well, what are we specifically talking about? So that those are important, is to get way more specific. And I think when we look at this type of a framework, is it ethical? Is it legal? Is it moral?
Right.
That will help us get more specific. And yeah, the lawyers will get involved,
Right.
especially from a legal perspective. And we need to allow that to happen. And I think that's currently happening in many organizations right now. You're seeing a lot of legal actions and a lot of legal policy, regulations, compliance happening inside of organizations. And I would say in many ways that's for good reason, because of the ethics challenge, because we need to know where the line is.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think there's two things, right? I'm assuming there'll be new regulations and new governing bodies created as a result of this, but at the same time, some of the existing ones, like OSHA, right, or some of the financial ones that I mentioned, or human rights organizations, right, are going to come in and have a say in how this is regulated. Hopefully.
Yeah. Yep. Cool. All right. So when you think about the idea of ethical AI, hopefully the blueprint is helpful in that. We've talked a lot about some examples. Let's see. Let me just think about perhaps one more example. Right. So I think these examples are somewhat helpful, even though we don't necessarily have the answer and we're not lawyers. But what we're doing here is we're wrestling with the idea of there probably is an ethical, legal, and moral consideration with AI. We're not exactly sure where the line is, but let's talk about it. Let's not just look the other way. We've talked about it from an advertising a little bit perspective. We talked about it for the idea of facial recognition in a couple of different ways, and so let's do one for maybe in the supply chain. Let me think.
Okay.
From a supply chain and logistics perspective, I know that some companies deploy facial recognition to track employees in warehouses or to authenticate the forklift drivers.
Right. From a
So,
security standpoint,
yeah, those are security. And,
Right.
and in the U.S., some states are going to have very strict biometric privacy laws.
Good point.
Fingerprints, eyes, right? So if AI gets a hold of that data, what can it do with it, right?
You can make a moniker of you, which could already do really easily.
Right.
You could totally make a moniker of me, put me on YouTube blasting out about, satanic cults that I promote. It's just crazy what you could do. You can the mockery, and you can incite riots.
Yeah. So
are we not seeing that now to some degree on YouTube?
Yeah, exactly. It's powder keg. It's powder keg.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the idea of a deep fake.
Yeah.
The idea of these AI threat actors that take on the voice and persona of an executive and actually become that person to give orders. It's kind of crazy, right? There's a lot of tech already at play that allows this to actually happen. False narratives can be created. Content and privacy can be violated. Things can be used for bad instead of for good.
Well, yeah, we're
And
going
then,
back to the supply chain, example again, right? I mean, all along there's so many, areas now that AI, interplays with all that um, it has to be rethought. You're right. I mean, simply just all the risks that now are exposed and available as a result of that. So I'm sure that new departments within organizations are going to creep up, right, to help assess this and regulate it. I would think so. Just like the problem will lead to someone solving it, hopefully, right? The issue
yeah,
is going to create it.
Just think about
yeah,
risk profiles used right now, especially around M&A, cybersecurity insurance. They use risk profiles. I think what that AI
Yeah.
enhances your capacity to mimic. You can make yourself look better than you are. There's a lot of fraud and deception. Inevitably that's its own new categories of risk. Risk is going to have to examine AI risk.
yeah. I mean, if you present yourself as some sort of vendor who can do certain things and you can't, that you're a fake supplier basically, but you show up like you know what you're doing.
Got all the invoices nice and tidy. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can manipulate that and misrepresent, but also impersonate.
So it makes a
Yeah.
fraud.
So in the book, I talk about the idea of sustainable, ethical AI practices, and I think a good place to start is on privacy. Where do you draw the line on privacy and customer data and employee data, and how do you protect that privacy of your employees? That's a good place to start when you think about AI, right? So that's my 10 cents there.
Yeah, well,
So
I think the European model of the GDPR, is probably a good blueprint or an outline for that, right?
yeah, yeah, and California as well has done some work, and I think it's easy to look at those and say, well, hey, those are overly restrictive. But if you look at the motive and the intent behind it, which I think
Right.
is important, it's why is it like that? And it usually has to do with privacy protection. There is usually some sort of line that we're trying to draw. And
Yeah, auditors have to have a line. Audit has to have a line at the end of the day.
right. Yeah. And just to say, well, it depends. Well, that's how bad things happen. Because it only takes one overextension or one use case where things go over the line and damage happens, and then it's too late. So, all right, so let's move on now to the idea of action in action. So, let's pretend that a tech company has come to us and they want to use AI in recruiting. They want to screen 10,000 resumes a month. What are those ethical guardrails? I think that's something that we can all relate to. Just from if you're not in the job hunt, it's a tough job market for a lot of people. Thousands of people are applying for single jobs. We know as workers that AI is employed in 90% of these organizations. So there's a lot of gamification happening. How do you stuff your resume with the right keywords? Well, when everybody does that, then how does the AI know? There's a lot of defaulting to favoritism and who you know, because people don't trust the AI and they'd rather hire people that they know. So, like, what would be some of our recommendations here to consider if we were advising a company about using AI in the recruiting process? What kind of thoughts do you guys have?
Well, that's a deep one.
Well, I mean, one of the things you think about, like when in recruiting, as a human resources function, you're getting people's personal information as they apply for jobs because you're asking for address and name and background and some, social, all manner of privacy and personal PII coming your way. So, AI accelerates the ability to, to break those codes and from a security standpoint. So there's complexities, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think right up front, I mean, you talked about the facial recognition, if it's being used in that, to make sure that, again, there's no discrimination whatsoever that's happening, even if it's inadvertent and it's written in the code somehow, it shouldn't be. I mean, that's a kind of a low-hanging fruit one, a very simple one, but certainly that's one of them across demographics that want to be treated, fairly.
Yeah, and there's legal. That's a legal thing, right?
Yeah,
There's a lot of laws
right.
around. Hmm.
And then again, how is AI? Just from not necessarily from a discrimination standpoint, but so let's say we're using AI for not just in the recruiting process. Let's say it's the second step, and AI is involved in the interview, and it's a virtual interview with a bot, right? How does that bot make sure that it asks questions that are fair, that it asks questions and it understands who's across from it to the degree that it can really discern those qualities that they're looking for, and not just the zeros and ones that are showing up on their resume, right? How does it discern that? How do you write that into the intelligence to make sure that, hey, here's somebody that's empathetic. You want to make sure that's a component in that. Here's somebody. How does AI determine whether somebody is trustworthy in an interview if it's being used to conduct that? Just a thought.
Yeah. Yeah, and if we apply the ethics triad here, there's legal, ethical, and moral pieces to this idea of using AI in recruiting. From a legal perspective, I think, most executives would understand that there's data privacy, like you're talking about, or discrimination. We want to avoid that. We want to make sure that we have those compliance components of the legal tied down, and be able to prove that AI is actually helping us with that and adhering to those legal components, which I think is easier than what you're bringing up, Mark, which is, well, is the AI fair, or is it unbiased in its selections and determinations? And then, how would we know? And I think that's a big fuzzy area. My answer to that is, well, you should still keep humans in the loop here.
Right.
And you've trusted humans before, so let's make sure that there's some sort of human oversight on the ethical piece of who gets shortlisted, for example.
Right.
If you have 1,000 people or 10,000 people, getting the list down to the 100 that an actual human looks at. Can you explain how you went from 1,000 to 100 legally? Can you explain how you did that ethically with unbiased and fair? If you are, then okay, that final 100 though, let's let humans do that, right?
Yeah.
And then from a moral perspective, there's a lot of broken process, and I think AI could actually help with the recruiting process to treat people with dignity and humanity, and not treat them like a piece of meat, or never get back to them or leave them hanging. There's a lot of improvement that AI could make to make the moral aspects of being, not selected, to be skipping over, or even selected, can make it better.
Right.
And I think that's a low hanging fruit is, okay, we had 10,000 people apply, but we never got back to them. That's probably not a moral thing to do. It's not treating people well. It doesn't fit under the auspices of having good social responsibility and stewardship. So those are things that AI could actually help with, and that's a low hanging fruit there, right?
And I think the perspectives involved in that, right? So it's not just the organization that's saying, hey, we want to use it for recruiting. There's also the career counselors, right? And the employment agencies, and the career departments at universities, right, that are going to be involved in this, that they need to have a feel for in terms of what they're doing to make sure that this is, and in the chain, how much do they want AI to be part of it, right? Is it just the high level filtering and then let's let a human take it, or what aspects do they need it to work for? So that's the question, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So based on that, audience, I'd love your take as well on this, but what are some of the aha moments here from our time together? What insights, what understanding, what jumps out at you as an aha moment from our discussion on, ethics, the idea of is it ethical, is it legal, is it moral, the relationship between AI and humans? What do you guys think, Brad, Mark? Any aha moments or reflections you want to share?
Well, it's just like me. I thought of my complexities. I talked across the risks continuums. Ever the cyber guy, right? But as I'm listening to you guys talk about your other components of stuff, you're bringing up things that I might not have even thought of. And it's like, yeah, I mean, you start thinking about like, how does the AI reduce that stack of 1,000 to the 15 that they're going to look at? And then when they look at, them, how is it like if not processing HR and they're not thinking about these types of compliance and audits against GDPR, whatever the thing is. So it's just, kind of expanded out like the levels of complexity. And I think like even then this conversation, this isn't but a drop in the bucket for like what's going to come in terms of just winding narratives around law, ethics, as you said, morality, and ever, of course, security, the concept of security.
Yeah, I think about the timeline of these events, and when it comes to any new application that's developed, and how quick this timeline is. So we're thinking about these things, and in 30 days or 60 days, the environment's going to be different. It's the field's changing quickly in terms of this, and there's going to be things that we're not even going to be thinking about that are already occurring, that they really have to think ahead about how AI is going to evolve. So this is a very interesting point. Where are we in this, timeline of grappling with these three components, as well as, deceptive practices? Where are we? We're early on, but what does that look like? What's it going to look like in 6 months or in 2 years? It's very, very disturbing is not the word, but hard to feel, think what it's going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's why
nothing in the way of like case law. When GDPR came out, I had a lot of CISOs asking me, well, what about this? What about that? I'm like, look, just you stay calm. Just look at your other certs that you're going through, and there's no reference frame to what they would even do. So it's like it's going to take time.
Yeah, and I think having a point of view, documenting some bullets, if you will, on look, let's make sure it's fair and equitable. Let's have some sort of definition of what that means to us. Let's create a one-page policy on this. Let's lead by being proactive here, not waiting for something to happen and reacting. So, we know we need a balance here across this idea of driving new markets and driving new products, but we also need to think about it from a compliance and risk and safety and ethics perspective. And, we didn't even really talk about a key component, which is the idea of AI safety, to keep people safe in their use of this technology. If the AI is making recommendations to hurt yourself or hurt others, what is the obligation of the company to be aware that that's happening and to intervene, or to put guardrails in place that prevent that type of discussion from happening in the first place.
Yeah, great point.
And these are key discussions to have, which we need to give our leaders a bit of a break around. This is why AI is slow to roll out in many organizations. It's these kinds of conversations that quote unquote make it slow, but we have to go slow to go fast in some regards.
You want to frame a reference for today, something to think, like if I could have invited anyone from the world of whatever it was to this call today, to this discussion, I'm thinking from right off the top of my head, Meta, Facebook, their chief privacy officer and their chief information security officer, have them sit in and listen and then chime in at the end. Those would be the two I invited. Or maybe you guys want to share who you might invite. So great conversation.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, let's get him for next time, Brad.
Yeah, I'll make a few phone calls. All right. I'll have my AI bot hunt them down.
That's right. All right, here's a word from our sponsor.
Yet starving for insights?
There has to be a better way.
Introducing the AI Lead, your guide to overcoming data drag and accelerating digital dominance. Discover how to eliminate inefficiencies, transform data into a competitive advantage, and achieve digital dominance with actionable AI strategies.
With the AI Lead, we're not just keeping up, we're leading the charge.
Industry leaders call it a must-read for future-ready executives. Master change, lead with command. Visit AILeadbook.com and unlock the blueprint to digital success today.
All right. And also, just wanted to let you know about our webinars. If you go to digitalcommand.co/webinars, We have webinars coming up on AI, the importance of AI, how to think about it in your organization. I'd love to see you at our webinars. Also, subscribe to our newsletter to get updates on a regular basis. We have a lot going on with the book. After 2 weeks of launch, it's just been amazing. I really want to thank everybody for their participation with the book. It became an Amazon bestseller, and we've had a lot of discussions with executives around how they're thinking about AI. And I think this show is quite timely for that. So on behalf of Brad and Mark, thanks so much for tuning in to this week's show. This is Brian Lambert and the Brian Lambert Show every Friday at noon Eastern. We'll see you next time.